That would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene.
This was kind of unusual situation. I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
Of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse people and dispose of them.
At 14 years old, Regina believed that she was in love with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Jones. So they decided to run away to Mexico and start a new life together. As they were hitching a ride out of Houston, a friendly truck driver pulled up and offered to help them. That would be the last time they would ever be seen alive again. And they would not be the only ones. This is the case of Regina Walters, the 14-year-old who was violated and abducted while being photographed. Born on May 5, 1975, Regina K. Walters was one of the 3 children of Carolyn and Jerry Walters. When she was 6 years old, she lost her older sister, Diana, who sadly took her own life at the age of 12. The parents then divorced, and the dad went to live in Houston, while the mom stayed in Pasadena, Texas. Regina and her brother Brian mostly stayed with their dad, Jerry, but would visit their mom often. On February 4th, 1990, at around 9:30 p.m., Regina told her mom, Carolyn, that she was going out to see a friend and would be right back. Her mom tried to stop her, but being a teenager, Regina was defiant and they got into a huge fight until the mom relented. Sadly, that would prove to be a big mistake. When Carolyn came home from work the next evening, she was surprised to find that her daughter was not yet home. She called all of Regina's friends to see if anyone had seen her, but no one had. She then called Regina's father in Houston, but he said he had also not heard from her. The distraught mother then went around the neighborhood asking around for the missing teen, but no one knew anything. Although Regina had a history of running away from home, she would always return on her own or call her mom to let her know that she was okay. But this time round, Caroline never heard from Regina, and she knew that something was wrong. So she went to Pasadena, Texas police and filed a missing persons report. She described Regina as a white, 5-foot-tall female weighing about 95 pounds and having long, curly brown hair. Posters and flyers with Regina's face on them were circulated around the area, with a reward being offered to anyone with information that would bring the teen home. 5 days went by without any information, and then one day, Caroline received a call from someone who said they had seen Regina talking to 2 young men on the evening that she left home. The caller identified the 2 guys as 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones and 17-year-old Billy Wayne Gibbs. The 2 were not strangers to the police, as they had already had a criminal record and were wanted in connection with an auto theft. So what business would a 14-year-old have with such kind of people? Later that evening, police managed to track down Billy, who told them that Ricky and Regina were in love and had run away to Mexico together. Since Ricky was on probation for theft, going out of state was a violation of his parole. So the police issued an arrest warrant for him and then placed Regina's information into the National Crime Information Center database to ensure that every law enforcement agency in the country knew that she was a missing person. While this was going on, Regina's father, Jerry, received a strange phone call from a man who claimed to have information about his daughter. The caller allegedly had asked if he was talking to Regina's father, and when Jerry said yes, the man told him that Regina was in a loft of a barn and that there had been some changes. He had cut her hair. Jerry then asked the caller if Regina was alive or dead, but the man hung up before answering. While Jerry was reporting this to the Houston police, Regina's mother, Carolyn, was also telling the Pasadena police about a weird phone call she had received from a stranger, saying that he had something to tell her about her daughter. The caller told her that they should meet the next day at a nearby convenience store so that he could relay the information in person. The next day, Carolyn went to the convenience store, accompanied by several officers who watched her from the car, hoping to catch the guy in action. They waited for over 2 hours, but the caller never showed up. When the police later traced the 2 calls, they learned that the call to Regina's father came from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, about 200 miles from where Regina was last seen, and the one to her mom was made from a payphone only 2 blocks away. The strange man called again 2 weeks later, asking for another meeting in the same convenience store with Regina's mother. The police immediately traced the call to a nearby payphone, but by the time they got there, the man was long gone. After this, there were no more leads for the police to follow, and the case went cold. In September 1990, a farmer in Illinois went to burn down his old barn, which had been abandoned for years. As he was inspecting the barn for the last time, he noticed something suspicious in the loft, and when he got closer, he was horrified to learn that it was a human skeleton. He immediately ran out and called the police. From the level of decomposition, investigators could tell that the remains had been there for quite a while. But there were no clothes or personal items to help identify who the victim was. Police could not even tell whether the victim was male or female, or what age they were when they died. However, judging from the size of the skull, they believed that the victim could have been a child, and they were not wrong. A pathologist later determined that the remains were of a young teenage girl who had been dead for almost a year.
Mark was able to determine that it was a young female between the ages of 14 to 16, her approximate weight, which was 90 to 110 pounds. There was indication that her hair had been cut. The distal ends had begun to grow again, but the forensics had told us that it was recent.
The cause of death was ruled to be strangulation, with the killer almost severing the neck off by twisting the balling wire around the victim 16 times. But there was something else, something really strange and creepy. It seemed that the killer had also shaved the girl's private parts before killing her. Using dental records, the FBI soon identified the victim as Regina Walters. But who could have done such a horrible thing to her? And where was the boyfriend? Since Ricky Jones was the last person to be seen with Regina alive, he automatically became the prime suspect in her murder. But then, based on how Regina had been killed, an FBI profiler determined that Ricky was probably not the killer after all.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene.
The agent developed a profile of the killer, describing him as an older white male who traveled around the country, maybe as a salesman or a truck driver, and based on the crime scene, the agent could tell that the killer was a sadistic perv who derived pleasure in inflicting pain on his victims.
Whoever did this crime was doing things beyond what was necessary to perpetrate the crime. Maybe a sexual predator, sexual sadist, a person that had other offenses also.
Around that time, investigators received some information of some other human remains being found in a town 200 miles from Houston. The skeleton was that of a young man who had a small bullet hole in his skull. Although at the time investigators could not identify the body, the victim's age and location in which he was found led them to believe it was probably Ricky. The killer probably killed him quickly to get him out of the way so that he could be alone with Regina to do whatever sadistic things he wanted to do with her. For the months that followed, investigators followed every possible lead that would help them catch the killer, but they all went cold. And for a while, it seemed like the person that had killed Regina with her boyfriend would actually get away with it. Meanwhile, in Arizona, a highway patrol officer saw a truck parked at the side of the road with the hazard lights on. He went to see if the person needed any help, but as he got closer, he could hear a woman screaming inside. When he tried to get in and investigate, a man suddenly jumped out and introduced himself as the driver of the truck. The man was acting suspiciously and tried to talk his way out of the situation, even handing his gun over to the officer.
And I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing, officer, we're doing just fine." He said, "There's no problem. I've got a gun in my back pocket." And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck. This was kind of an unusual situation. And I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
After putting the man in handcuffs, the officer went to check inside the cab of the truck, and what he discovered was truly chilling. a terrified woman was handcuffed to the wall, naked. The officer also found an array of torture tools, including chains, horse bits, whips, and long sticks with clips on the end. There was also a camera, some bloody towels, and several hair strands that did not match that of the woman found in the truck. The truck driver, now identified as Robert Ben Rhodes, was arrested and taken into custody, but at the time, the officers had no idea the extent to which his crimes had actually gone. Raised in Council Bluffs, Iowa, Robert had a relatively normal childhood, but as he got older, he started getting in trouble with the authorities and was even arrested for vehicle tampering and public fighting as a teenager. After graduating from high school in 1964, Robert decided to follow in his father's footsteps and join the Marine Corps. But that same year, his dad took his own life after being accused of violating a 12-year-old girl. A few years later, Robert was dishonorably discharged from the military after being involved in a robbery. He tried to get a job in law enforcement after this, but was rejected due to the robbery incident. Eventually, he ended up becoming a long-haul trucker. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Robert was married 3 times and had a son with his first wife. That also was the time he started getting involved in the bondage and submission stuff, and one of his ex-wives even said that he was allegedly abusive to her and was turned on by her suffering. When the police searched Robert's apartment after his arrest, they were horrified to find pictures of naked teenage girls with handcuffs and bruises all over their bodies. All of them had shaved hair and terrified looks on their faces. And as investigators were going through the chilling images, they noticed that one of the victims looked familiar. It was Regina Walters. The images showed her with different hair lengths and bruises, which meant that she had been held captive for an extended period of time before she was eventually murdered. These particularly disturbing pictures show a defenseless Regina wearing a black dress were said to have been taken moments before her death. As it would turn out, Regina and Ricky were not Robert's first victims. He was a serial killer who had been preying on women and hitchhikers from as early as the 1970s. His first confirmed victims were actually a couple, Patricia Candace Walsh and her husband, Douglas Zykowski. The two were hitchhiking in January 1990 when Robert picked them up in his truck while on a long-haul journey. Just like in Ricky and Regina's case, he immediately killed the husband and then kept Patricia for a week, torturing and violating her multiple times, before eventually killing and dumping her body. In a span of 15 years, investigators believe that Robert had killed about 50 people before he was eventually caught.
His trips from Houston to Baltimore to LA and back in a matter of 4 to 5 days at a time could just give you an idea of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse these people and dispose of them.
Robert is now 76 years old and serving life without parole in the Menard Correctional Center in Southern Illinois. What do you think about this case? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section and be sure to like and subscribe for more.